A medieval castle was more than just a strong stone building. It was a living place full of people, noise, and daily work. Behind its thick walls, many lives moved together. Lords ruled, servants worked, and soldiers trained for battle. Every room had a purpose. Every sound had meaning. Most castles were cold and dark, but they were also centers of power, law, and control. They were homes, prisons, armories, and courts all in one. People who lived there followed strict rules. Their days started early and ended when the sun went down. In this video, we will look at the daily life of people living in a medieval castle. We will see what the workers did in the kitchen, what the guards were responsible for, and how people ate, slept, and kept warm. A medieval castle was built mainly for defense. The thick stone walls were very strong and could stop many attacks. The castle's defenders had many ways to protect the people inside. The walls were high and often had towers. Soldiers could climb these towers to watch far into the distance for any enemies coming. One of the most important parts of the castle was the gatehouse. This was the main entrance and the strongest point. The gatehouse had heavy wooden doors reinforced with iron. Behind these doors was a portcullis, a heavy iron grate that could be dropped quickly to block the way. Defenders could attack enemies trapped between the doors and the portcullis. The walls had narrow openings called arrow slits. These were thin, tall holes that allowed archers to shoot arrows at attackers but kept the archers safe from return fire. Archers played a very important role during an attack because they could stop enemies before they reached the walls. If enemies tried to climb the walls using ladders, defenders used boiling water, hot oil, or heavy stones. They poured these from small openings in the walls or ceilings called murder holes. These were dangerous traps for anyone trying to enter. Castles also had special devices like ballistae or catapults that threw large stones to damage enemy siege equipment or soldiers. When a castle was under siege, the people inside needed enough food and water to last a long time. Food was stored in granaries and cellars. Water was brought from wells or cisterns inside the castle. If supplies ran out, the people could starve or be forced to surrender. The defenders trained every day with swords, spears, and bows. They needed to be ready to fight at any time. The castle was not only a home, but a military fortress designed to protect everyone inside from danger. When you enter the castle, you first come to the main courtyard. This was the heart of the castle where most daily activities happened. The courtyard was busy and noisy. People worked, talked, and moved about all day long. In the courtyard, you could see blacksmiths making tools and weapons. There were stables where horses were kept. Servants carried water and food from the kitchens. Soldiers trained with swords and bows. Sometimes merchants came to sell goods. The courtyard had places to store food like grain and vegetables. Some castles even had pigeons or doves to send messages or as food. A well or a large cistern was important to bring water inside the castle. This busy place was full of life and work, but it was also where danger could come. If enemies attacked, the courtyard was the first place they would try to reach. The lord of the castle and his family lived in the strongest part, usually the keep or the main tower. Their life was very different from the servants and soldiers. The lord had many duties like managing the land and holding courts. The great hall was the center of life for the lord and his guests. It was a large room where people ate meals, held meetings, and celebrated events. The hall had big fireplaces to keep warm, long wooden tables, and tapestries on the walls. The lord's private rooms were small but important. They had beds with curtains to keep out the cold and some simple furniture. Clean water was rare, so baths were not common. People washed with cloths or small basins. The lord's family also enjoyed music, stories, and sometimes tournaments or hunts outside the castle. Religion was important, and the Lord often prayed in the castle chapel. Inside the castle, many people worked hard every day. The servants had many jobs that were very important. In the large kitchen, cooks prepared food for the Lord, his family, and all the workers. Other servants carried water from the well to different parts of the castle. Clean water was not easy to find, so it was precious. The laundry workers washed clothes by hand in cold water. They also cleaned the castle floors and rooms. Some servants worked in the stables. They fed the horses and cleaned their stalls. Horses were very important for travel and war. There were also servants who helped the Lord's family. They helped them dress and serve food during meals. These servants had to be careful and polite. Life for servants was not easy. They worked long hours, often from early morning until late at night. The castle was noisy, crowded, and sometimes dirty. There was little privacy. Servants slept in small rooms or shared beds. The Lord was the highest authority within the thick stone walls, ruling over everyone inside. He was not just the ruler of the land, but also the judge who decided what was right and wrong. When there was a problem or a crime, people came to the Lord's court to seek justice. The court was usually held in a large hall or a special room inside the castle. The Lord listened to complaints, heard evidence, and made decisions. Sometimes the court was fair, but often the Lord's word was final. There were no modern lawyers or judges. The law was different in every region, and local customs played a big role in decisions. Punishments for crimes were often very harsh. If someone stole, lied, or fought, they could be punished severely to warn others. Common punishments included fines, public humiliation, or imprisonment. The castle had a dungeon, a dark and cold underground prison where criminals were kept. Life in the dungeon was terrible. It was damp, dirty, and cramped. Prisoners had little food and no comfort. Some crimes led to public punishments. For example, thieves or troublemakers might be put in the stocks or pillory in the castle courtyard. These devices held a person's hands and head, exposing them to the shame and sometimes the abuse of the public. This was meant to scare others and keep peace. More serious crimes could lead to corporal punishment, like whipping or branding. Execution was rare inside the castle, but sometimes ordered by the Lord and carried out outside by a professional executioner. Death sentences were usually reserved for the worst crimes like murder or treason. The Lord's court also settled disputes between peasants or neighbors, such as land arguments or debts. These cases were often solved quickly, as a long trial was expensive and difficult. Justice was practical and harsh, meant to keep order in a rough and dangerous time. Food was very important in a medieval castle. The Lord and his family ate different food than the servants and soldiers. The kitchen was a busy place, often loud and smoky. Cooks worked over large open fires and heavy iron pots. They prepared many meals every day for all the people living in the castle. The main food for the Lord's table was meat like beef, pork, and sometimes game like deer or boar. Fish was common too, especially on days when eating meat was not allowed for religious reasons. Bread, cheese, and vegetables were also important parts of the diet. Food was not always fresh. Without refrigerators, cooks had to use salt or smoke to preserve meat. Fresh vegetables and fruits were only available in certain seasons. Some castles had gardens to grow herbs and vegetables nearby. The servants ate simpler food, often leftovers from the Lord's meals. Their diet had more bread, porridge, and vegetables. Drinking water was sometimes unsafe, so people often drank ale or weak beer instead. Living inside a stone fortress was often tough on health. Clean water was scarce, and toilets were simple, like basic latrines or chamber pots that were emptied outside. These conditions often caused bad smells and made the air unhealthy. People didn't wash often, and bad smells were normal. Soap existed, but it was made from animal fat and ashes. Only the rich could afford better soap with herbs or perfumes. Most people did not bathe every day. Lords and ladies took baths in wooden tubs filled with hot water, but it took time to carry and heat the water. They sometimes added flowers or oils to make it smell nice. Servants helped with the bath and brought clean clothes after. Common people, like guards or kitchen workers, rarely bathed. They cleaned their hands and faces when they could, but full baths were not common. Instead, they used cloths to wipe sweat and dirt. There were small rooms called infirmaries where the sick could rest. The Lord's family sometimes had access to local healers or barber surgeons. These healers used herbs, bloodletting, and simple surgeries, but medicine was not well understood. Many people died young because of infections and poor hygiene. Diseases spread quickly, especially during times when many people were crowded inside, like during attacks. Despite these problems, the fortress was still safer than many small villages with worse conditions. Even though castle life was hard, people still found ways to enjoy themselves. Entertainment was different depending on who you were. Lords and ladies had musicians, dancers, and storytellers who performed during feasts. They played instruments like the lute or harp and sang songs about love, war, or religion. For the workers and guards, free time was simple. They might play dice or other small games using bones or carved stones. On holy days, everyone gathered in the courtyard to watch plays, jugglers, or even small tournaments with wooden weapons. Children of the nobility learned to ride horses, practice sword fighting, and read or write if tutors were available. Castle servants' children helped their parents or ran errands, but they also played outside with sticks, balls, or homemade dolls. Feasts were a big event. Long tables filled the hall, and people ate meat, bread, and stews if they were lucky. There was singing, laughter, and sometimes wild games. But once the feast was over, life returned to duty, hard work, and cold nights. A castle was more than just a home. It was the center of power in the area. The lord who lived there controlled the land around it. People from nearby villages came to the castle for help, justice, or safety. The castle showed who was in charge. Its big walls and towers sent a clear message. The lord was strong, and people had to follow his rules. When problems happened, like a crime or land fight, people came to the castle for judgment. The lord acted like a judge and solved the problems. It was also a place for collecting taxes. Farmers paid part of their crops or money to the lord. These taxes helped feed the castle and its workers. During war or danger, people from the countryside ran to the castle. It gave them protection behind its walls. That's why castles were often built in places easy to defend, on hills, near rivers, or with wide views of the land. The castle was also a symbol. It showed the power of a family or a king. If a king wanted to control new land, he built a castle there. The more castles a lord had, the more respect he got. Life in a medieval castle was tough. It was cold, dark, and full of hard work, but it was also a place of power and safety. Everyone had a role. Lords ruled, knights trained, servants worked. The castle was a home, a fortress, and a symbol of control. Even with strong walls, life wasn't easy, but for centuries, castles stood at the center of medieval life. Their story still lives on today. The past is darker than you think. Subscribe for more and step back into the Middle Ages with me. I'll see you next time.